Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. In this episode of It's Time for Science, we're talking about going back to school. My name is Tom Racine, and I am your host. We start off by talking with education leader Rosanna Ayers. Rosanna is the former director of youth education at the Biomimicry Institute and has been a county office science coordinator with over 20 years of classroom experience. Ms. Ayers has written an article about getting started with science on day one, getting ready for a new school year with science, tips for teachers. She shares some tips on easily getting started with highly engaging science activities and discusses why starting with science is a great and effective way to start your year. You can find her article over at fossnextgeneration.com in the Insights section. Well, July is upon us, and although for many teachers it feels like summer has just gotten started, it's time to start thinking about going back to school. Luckily for you, here at It's Time for Science, we've got you covered on how to start teaching science from day one. Joining us today is educational leader Rosanna Ayers. Rosanna has 20 years' experience as a classroom educator and is the former director of youth education at the Biomimicry Institute and county office science coordinator. Rosanna specializes in teaching educators who are new to the field and has written a great article about back-to-school science on the FOSS Next Generation website, and she is here to talk about that and give us some additional tips. So let's dive right in and see how we can help you get your students excited about science as soon as they get to school. So Rosanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I mean, I love talking to the experts about this stuff. And obviously, back to school is one of the, you got to get off on the right foot. They say you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So let's talk about that first day of school. I'm going to guess most kids aren't really thrilled to be there. So how can teachers use science activities from the first day to get kids excited and engaged?
Well, you're completely right about that. Usually students have a little bit of anxiety about going back to school. What most people might not realize is a lot of educators do. Sometimes they've had to move classrooms or grade levels, and so they're just as motivated as the students are to really have a great first day. And so one of the things that I suggested in the article is that educators start with highly engaging science activities and use that to frame their interaction with students. They can teach lots of things besides the content. They can really focus on what it is that they'd like to see from students in terms of behavior using science as the headline, if you will.
Excellent. I think we're going to cover some of that about what you should be looking for. But why in general start with science, especially for teachers in K through 3 through 5 they're not specialized in science. They may be intimidated by it. They may feel that there's too much prep or materials. But why do you think starting with science is such a good idea?
Well, science is such a feast for all of the senses, if you will. It's something you can do. It's hands-on. You're watching things. You're thinking about things. It's just really a content area that's full of excitement. So as far as what you would be able to engage students with, science really has it all. Lots of language to develop, interactions. I actually love watching students, especially in elementary grades, kind of see a demonstration of science, or when they're doing things, it's really fun to just watch their faces light up. That little ooh thing that happens with the mouth.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That's what we're going for. That ooh.
Adults, yeah. We adults do it sometimes too. Usually if we're tasting something really great. Yeah, so those are some of the reasons for using science.
Well, I think it's a great idea because I come from an art background, and I figure that both art and science are very interactive and they're fun. I think kids may not be expecting that on their first day. They're expecting to sit there with a book and write down notes and all this kind of stuff, and to immediately jump into something kind of fun and engaging has got to be a great way to hit the ground running.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I did my little ooh when you said you come from an art background. I think that sounds like a lot of fun as well to introduce those types of activities when you're in the classroom with students. It's just a really nice, low stress way to begin to engage students. And, I did hear you when you said that a lot of elementary school teachers might not teach a lot of science. So for them, it might be a little bit, more stressful. However, if you think about the goal of the science activity being to get to know your students, then it really does alleviate some of the stress that's placed there. You're really not focused on the science content per se. You're focused on the interaction. So the content is there, but you don't have to be right about it. You're just facilitating an activity and then, listening to students and watching them and hearing how they engage with it and really finding out more about them through the science.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little later too, and I thought that was very interesting because I think it's not so much about this is not necessarily a lesson. It's
Right.
more like an activity. It's more like an icebreaker almost in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it can be done again. So, one of the suggestions is just pull out something that you're going to do later in the year and just start it on day one. Give it a little go, see how the students are feeling about it, some of the things that you discover about their interactions. Sometimes we feel like we can only do something once, maybe twice in the classroom, but only if students don't understand it the first time. But I just want to give all the educators out there permission to redo lessons and just be very transparent about it. I've redone lessons before. You start it and there's a fire drill, or you start it and there's a new student that comes. There's lots of reasons that we might redo it. And every once in a while, I'm going to be honest, I've had to restart it because, like, that did not go well. I don't know what was happening, but let's put it away and start it again. So I
Well,
think
I mean, and you have the chance to say that, yeah, this was just an activity. We'll go more in depth later,
yes,
like it was the plan all along. I think
yeah,
that's great. So,
yeah, absolutely.
You also talk a little. I mean, we had talked coincidentally last episode with teacher David Curry, who was the Hurd Award winner for Science Teacher of the Year, and that was one of his big things. Was talking about he does every year now. He does an experiment with nails and a balancing challenge, and just lets the kids explore the solutions and walks around and helps them. Doesn't really teach them, just sort of lets them do their thing, and that's what he does every year. So it's kind of cool that this is the same. We're going down that route here. Do you talk about a series of steps for how teachers can do this in the article? So I want to go through those basically with you. So step one is just briefly explaining the activity.
Right. Yeah. You just want to spend just a little bit of time explaining the activity. Think in terms of just setting it up so that they'll understand what it is they're doing. It's really not an opportunity for educators to try to go deep into the science or, take out the mystery. You just want to give them enough so that when they start working in those pairs, that they know what they're supposed to do. So, just a quick introduction like, hey, this is what we're doing today. There'll be two of you, person one, whoever's closest to the door, or some little teacher trick to decide who's going to go first. The person whose birthday is closest to today, things like that, gets to go first. And then the other person is going to help support and then have them rotate the roles for whatever the activity is. But it's really pretty short, the least amount that's needed to get them safely engaged in the activity.
And then they say step two, while the students are working, you circulate around the room looking for examples of how they're doing together. What are you looking for at that point, and how formal is it? Is it just more of a general introduction, or what is a teacher looking for?
Well, you can be looking for a few different things. If you have something in mind, let's say you've gone and you've looked at the files of the students, or you've talked to their previous teachers, and you have some ideas in mind about the types of behaviors that you're looking for, then you can definitely do that. But without any more preparation than the actual activity, you might be just circulating around the room looking for examples of students who are engaging in what you would term very healthy and positive ways that you want to call attention to. You don't have to do it there at the time, but you're just writing down on a little piece of paper, like, oh, you saw people sharing, you saw them saying please and thank you, you saw them asking, before they took something out of another's hand, you saw them, repeating if it wasn't understood the first time. Just those basic people skills, right? What we call the soft skills. There's a whole articles and debate on whether really they are soft skills, but observing those skills of things that you would like to see in the classroom. You're also looking for non-examples. You might see students who are not getting along as well, and that's of course not any cause for immediate alarm, but it's definitely something that you want to keep an eye on and write down and kind of annotate as to what the struggle might have been, so that you can help the students debrief and figure out what the tension was, at the time. Maybe if it was something like, going back to the previous example, you hear students, maybe their voices are elevating a little bit and they're upset because someone took something out of their hand without asking, or said something to them in a way that they didn't appreciate. So you're really just looking for, hey, at the end of the activity, I saw these behaviors, and they were wonderful. Love to see those, because that is the collaborative culture that we're moving toward. And then also asking the students, hey, is there anything that came up during your time working together? You'll already have your list. So if they bring it up, that's even better.
Even better.
Right. But if they happen to not bring it up, hey, I noticed some tension in one of the groups, and you don't have to point the group out. That's not the purpose of it. But really, you two over
Those
in the
two will
corner.
be sitting in the closet for the rest of the concert.
Exactly. But you definitely want to make sure that the rest of the students, who probably also saw that little bit of a struggle, understand that what it looks like for students to get along and collaborate properly, and that you will also intervene and notice when they don't. So then that's an opportunity to have those conversations as well.
So I think you covered this. Step 3 is have students complete it and clean up and report on what they learned. And then step 4 is thank them for the work they did and make generalizations about their level of collaboration. So that's all that part. And I think it's this part I found really interesting that you wrote. It is important to note that this is not a time to label behaviors as deficient if you've not had that class conversation and all that kind of thing. So this is really sort of a very positive generalization, trying to play up the good parts, right? Is that mostly the approach?
Yeah, it really is. And I've done this several times. I wouldn't suggest it if I hadn't tried it in my classroom back in the day as a classroom teacher, but I had tried it, and there really weren't that many times where you did have to have a conversation about inappropriate behavior. Typically the students want to get along. Maybe they're a little deep sleep deprived at the beginning of the school year. They've been staying up late, usually a little dehydrated. Everyone's getting into the classroom, and the first few days can be a little overwhelming too. The first time everybody's completely in their outfits, little stiff clothes. And so you really don't want to use that as a time to make a decision about who your students are behaviorally. You just are trying to assess overall, how do they work together? And then it's like a baseline of what you, as the instructional leader in the classroom, need to put in place to support the students moving forward. If there are a lot of little squabbles over who does what, then, an educator will say, okay, I need to be more clear about the roles, who's assigned which role, and then how they trade off roles. If there's a lot of bickering about what you've said as your instruction, then as the teacher in the classroom, know that you need to label the instructions and put it where everyone can see it, so they can refer to it. So it's really just about understanding who your students are as a collective and how to support them, at the same time being very explicit about the behaviors that you are looking for moving forward.
I say in the article, you point out that this will be difficult, but remember you're practicing the skills of scientists, classroom management, and allowing them to voice at the same time. So that is a lot of, that's like a controlled chaos situation, I would think. Are there any tips you have about that? Or just, basically just kind of like, herding the cats, keeping them under control?
Well, yeah, that's funny you say that. I would say, I think some of the tips are to make sure that the activity is somewhat straightforward. For your first day of school and the first activity, you don't want to pick a lab that has 28 steps in it and lots of materials. You really want to do something that requires just 1 or 2 steps that they have to remember at a time. Just pretty straightforward, not too many materials, very common materials that can be used for it. And just really remember, this is your first day meeting the students, so they're getting to know you. Sometimes educators have to remember that every classroom has a different feel to it. And so you're still developing that with your students, and there'll be plenty of time to communicate with them regarding your expectations, and also hear from them the types of things that they would do with their previous teachers. And is that something that you're, interested in carrying on or not, right? So they're getting to know you and your rules, and you're getting to know them and their preferences as well. Yeah.
I said in the article also, you mentioned a few examples, but I'd like to talk specifically about some examples of what you think would be good ones. One of my favorites was the water drops on pennies, how many they can handle, which is something I did with my kids. And I loved it. I thought it was a ton of fun because you're always surprised. It's going to be like 5 and it's like 750
Right.
later and it's still going. And so water drops on pennies, that's a great one. Do you have any others that are sort of like super simple that you really like?
Anything with water tends to be very fun. So you can, and oddly
Water
enough,
balloon fight,
right,
that sort of thing.
right, and oddly enough, not that hard to clean up. Really, just paper towels, right? um, there are not too many specific activities. It really is around what materials you have on hand. I talked a little bit about looking for separation of ink with water and paper towels. That's a fun one. Excuse me. Looking for the rates in which water will flow off of different surfaces is a fun one. You can tell I'm getting to the water. I also like any activity where they're doing deep observation of things and maybe categorizing them. So it might be leaf samples from around the campus. I mean, it could be a variety of things that you're doing and bringing to the table. Might be a collection of shells that you already have. They're just any type of activity that just allows the student to really focus for a good, 5 to 10 minutes on what they're doing undisturbed. And, honestly, I love the art connection when you talked about your background with art, a really quick sketch of something that they're seeing, a natural artifact that they're bringing from the outside and doing a sketch on. An activity like that would also be very, very fun. Of course, you'd have to build in the component then on how they share that work. So it might be a shared pen where they've got one item in front of them and, one piece of paper and two pencils. And, every 30 seconds they trade it back and forth. I've never done that, but boy, that sounds like fun, doesn't it? Because it's not happening to us.
I've done some cartoon jams with other cartoonists. You do that. You hand it back. You have 1 minute. And you got to do something. You hand it back and forth. It's a lot of fun. And I'm sure that a lot, especially younger kids. I mean, I grew up as an artist, but almost every little kid is an artist on some level. So I would assume that incorporating that would also make the science activity very exciting for them.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I think we've got to try that out pretty soon.
We're inventing new stuff as we talk. That's what's so great here.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, as we said earlier, I mean, I think that's the thing. I think I could see a lot of teachers saying, "Oh my God, science!" I mean, immediately it comes with this like baggage, but we're trying to keep it very simple. That's the whole point. Is that it doesn't have to be that way, right? You can build up to that later. That's something that happens later. And I also say I like the idea that this is something they can show parents or guardians on a back to school night. So it's already so the kids will be ready to show their parents later. And I'm sure that they're probably very excited about that. There's also a great plan in the article about planning for science, not only from day one, but 30 days in and for open houses and assembly days. How important is it to like sort of map that out? Because working science into their curriculum can sometimes be daunting.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty important to get a handle on your science instruction just because of the amount of materials and sometimes of the preparation that's needed because that content area is so engaging. Anything with science and engineering is so engaging for the students. But it does come with a slightly higher amount of preparation that is needed. The recommendation is really just to dig into your science curriculum that you have on campus to look for opportunities to do that first day component with them, that activity, to look through it and just see if you can find something that looks like, oh, this looks fun. Let's try this out. But just the small portion of it, not the before where you're setting up a lot of lecturing or the end where you're really drilling down to know the content, but really the activity portion just to get them thinking in terms of science. So those types of things are what's suggested in the article, and really keeping science at the forefront throughout the year as an engaging content area that already has embedded in it, plenty of language, art skills, plenty of math skills, art skills if you choose to go in that direction for representation, and all the other ones. You can really, within the context of your science time in the classroom, you can get so much done. It's really quite. I find it fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because it's really becoming a theme of this podcast is that to point out that science covers all of the disciplines. It covers writing, it covers art, it covers social sciences, it covers history. So science can be used in every one of those areas. It's very, very cool. I was wondering, especially since you had a role as a county office science coordinator of various districts, just in general, one of the themes of our podcast is why is it important to make time for science? Why is it important for you as philosophy, basically?
Science has the opportunity to be a level playing field for students if we will allow it. Having the students engage in the content at that time is so important. And one of the things that I love about science, the student doesn't have to have had all these background experiences that they might need in other content areas to pull the pieces together. With some really solid science instruction, you really have that event in the classroom. So if you were to do that activity day one, you've had a science lesson or event. We'll call it a science event so that educators know you don't have to do a lot of teaching around it. But you've had your science event, and you can move on from that point where you're doing things in the classroom with the students. That's one of the things that I really love about science is that you can do it with the students. They have the activity right there. It may or may not be connected to local phenomenon, which is something that we'll be, discussing in later editions. But really, the opportunities to engage students are endless when you're thinking in terms of like we're going to do hands-on, we're doing minds-on, we're doing full conversations. We're asking tons of questions that we don't have the answers to, and that's okay. Just getting students thinking about questions that they have. That is a wonderful start for students for them to be curious again and to know that it's fine. That we're going to ask a bunch of questions and we might not have the answers, and that's okay.
I mean, that's got to be one of those things that blows their little minds because you go to school and you think, I'm just going to get all the facts. And science is suddenly like, well, we're not sure. What about that?
Right.
It's like, It's such a creative way to think. And the kids are like, wait, what? I get to have an opinion and I have to work on this? This is awesome. So
right.
I just want to thank you for your time, Rosanna. This is really, really interesting stuff. Your article will be able to be found online at fossnextgeneration.com/insights. And you can find the link in the description. And I just wanted to thank you for your time. I think it's just a really exciting way to get students started off the right foot and help teachers out. I think it's got to be invaluable to teachers to get kids already excited about the year to come.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me here today. I really enjoyed writing this article. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. We've decided we're going to start this new thing with the art and science activity, so we'll have to come back and talk about that. And I really
I'm your guy. Just bring me in. We'll go. It'll be great.
I just really want to encourage all the teachers out there to just try it and give yourself permission to really explore and have these fun experiences with your students. They go a long way with the students after the somewhat labor-intensive years that have been in education. Just really allow yourself to have some fun, and science is really one of the content areas where you can have it.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Rosanna, thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you.
Now it's time to talk with Laruen Brown and Brian Campbell about starting the year with science, establishing a safe classroom culture, some specific activities they recommend starting with, and how to keep your science instruction going effectively throughout the year. Laruen Brown is an instructional coach with Oakland Unified School District with 11 years of experience in education, including 8 years as a science teacher, winning the 2018 Grand Prize NSTA Shell Science Lab Challenge. Brian Campbell has been a curriculum developer with FOSS for the past 18 years, was a classroom teacher for over 7 years, and is the co-author of Science Notebooks, Writing About Inquiry. Well, welcome to part 2 of Back to School episode on It's Time for Science. I have with me, we're going to do a little roundtable here with Laruen Brown, who's an instructional coach from Oakland Unified School District, and Brian Campbell, who's a curriculum developer for FOSS Science. And we are going to talk a little bit more about the first day back at school and planning out your entire year and using different sorts of where to put your materials and how to set up your classroom. So we're going to have a little discussion about that. And let's just jump right in. So we just talked to Rosanna Ayers about how important it is to hit the ground running with science and do something from the very first day to get the kids involved and excited about it, keeping it simple but getting it started. So Lauren, I just want to get your feelings on that, how important it is to start with something like that on the very first day, and any kind of suggestions you might have for teachers who want to do that.
Yeah, the beginning of the year is all about culture. You're setting those routines. You're working with the students. You're bringing all these different kids who may not know each other together, and you kind of want to make them familiar with one another in a fun way. And so I love science for that, just that either whether it's the engineering aspect or STEM, but bringing them together, and because it's group work, they're having to work together in a fun way. And so for me, I always build my culture for my classroom through science. And so we do an experiment called Saving Sam, which is kind of more engineering aspect, but you literally have a gummy worm and a lifesaver, and they're working together to like stretch the lifesaver over the worm and have to flip over a cup, and just things like that. Different experiments, like really low, what is the word? Not too much prep, low prep experiments, just so the kids can get used to working with each other, get used to investigating. It's a great just time to just build that relationship with one another for the start of the school year.
Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think similar to what Lauren said, having an experience that all kids can engage in right from the get-go is important. I think also having something that's rich enough to generate some high-quality observations or some good discussion also helps. I think it's important right from the get-go that students know that their teacher values their voice. And I think that that's really important in science, because there's going to be a lot of risk-taking from a student's perspective in terms of explaining what they're thinking, explaining their observations, and they need to know that that's a safe environment. So I think that first experience, as Lauren said, really kind of sets the culture for the classroom. And you can start really getting the sense of students building on others' ideas, students listening respectfully, but also it gives us as educators a sense of what it is that students are able to do as they first come in. So it's a great experience to get students excited, but also just build that classroom culture.
Lauren, are there specific things you're looking for as a teacher, walking around, checking them out? I mean, you're not doing a full evaluation, but you're kind of getting a sense of this group of kids, because it's your kids are fresh from summer. They may not be there. Like half of them probably don't want to be there. You're not even sure the teachers want to be there at that point. So it's a question of what are you looking for as a teacher while this stuff is going on? What are you trying to engage with?
Well, you really want to give them a chance to, kind of build those norms as a class. And so it's giving them that practice. And so Brian had said that giving them the opportunity to like build on each other and like, make these observations. And it's really setting the bar high, those expectations that you want, and then being able to kind of refer back to the norms of the classroom, whether they're on a poster or wherever they're set up in the classroom, but being able to refer back to that, and even acknowledging the students, hey, I heard such and such use this language. That's one of our norms, just kind of reinforcing it, because it is the beginning of the school year. Just shouting out the students every time you see something. The note taking, I saw this person, their notes have this. Like, as a scientist, we always incorporate that into our notes. That's one of our norms. It's just a great opportunity to just kind of reflect on what's going well, and then praise those students. And then you'll notice it kind of overflow into the other groups.
Right. Could you elaborate on that? Because when we talked to Rosanna, she talked about how you don't. This is a very time to be very positive. Don't. It's not really about setting, any negative expectations. It's really, as Lauren just said, to be very positive. Is that sort of the best approach?
Yeah, I think at least early on, to come in with a very rich three-dimensional lesson might be a bit ambitious. It's something we want to work towards, but that initial experience focusing on the science and engineering practices, planning and conducting an investigation, gathering data, analyzing it, constructing explanations. These are things that kids will naturally do. With a little steering and a little guidance, they can get someplace pretty productive with it. So I think just focusing on, the SEPs for that early initial experience, get a lot of success out of that, getting them used to interacting with each other, and also just the expectations of the class. That we are going to be doing some work, we are going to be communicated about it. Right from the get-go, I think that sets a good impression for students, as well as gets the teachers started off on a good step.
Rosanna had mentioned some ideas like the penny, where you put as many drops of water and you try to figure out how many it's going to be. That's a very simple thing. Lauren just said something about the gummy worm. Brian, you said something when we were talking before about just observing something like an apple or a leaf.
An apple or an orange, or some piece of fruit where there's some variation from one apple to the other, really kind of hones in their observation skills. Is it completely round? I think kids initially think an apple is a round object, but when you start to really look at a lot of different apples, you notice that they're not the same. They have variations in colors, stems, that kind of stuff. And I think that it keeps it easy, as Lauren said, from a prep standpoint, especially right away. But it also gives it's rich enough to provide some opportunities for kids to make some good observations.
And also an apple a day keeps the doctor away, so it's perfect. Yes. We're bringing nutrition in, which is awesome. Yes. So, Lauren, do you have any other sort of ideas? Or because I know that one of the things that teachers, especially like elementary teachers, may not be comfortable with science, or feel it's like it's their strong suit. So simple ideas or a simple experiment or an investigation that they could do?
Yeah, there's so many. Let's see. There's even kind of going on the same property as like the drop of water. There's one where you fill a cup with water and you keep putting drops so that you can see the surface tension happening. It kind of builds like a bubble on top of the cup. There's also the putting the paper clip on the water. See, for my older kids or any kids, the Orbeez in water, they kind of disappear.
Right.
Even with that one, like a lot of these, even though they're kind of like, some of these activities you start with as early as 3rd, 2nd grade, but to kind of make it more advanced for the older kids, you could kind of go into like the note-taking process. Does your scientific drawing show the water molecules and, this and that, like, trying to build on seeing what they already know from previous years. So that way you're not like, it doesn't feel too, I don't want to say babyish, but kids get, that's when you start seeing some of the different personalities come out when they're bored or they've done something 1,000 times. So just kind of think about like, you don't know who's in your classroom. You're still trying to figure out, but how can you take something simple and then also differentiate it for everyone?
We're also talking about the organizing your classroom now, moving beyond the first day. So back to school, but if you're, I know that there's differences between if you're a school K through 5, say, and you teach all subjects, or if you're a science coordinator, or if you're an older grade. How do you set up your classroom to make science more accessible and things like that? So starting with like the younger grades, Brian, do you have any suggestions in terms of like, we work with FOSS and they have these amazing kits and all the stuff is there, but you have to organize all of that stuff when you get to it. So really, what are some of the steps that teachers need to take before the first day to sort of make science more accessible?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things. One's the environment, the classroom itself. I'm a big proponent of making science accessible right from the get-go. So things involving language, word walls, sentence starters, things like that are prominently a part of the work of science, especially for the younger kids. So making sure that those are visible, accessible, and used from the get-go is part of it. The other is, some just functional things, setting up material stations so kids can pick up equipment and return it in in an orderly fashion without there being any difficulties from a behavior standpoint. But I also think that there is some thinking that a teacher needs to do, much like they prepare for language arts or mathematics. They preview the material. They have to understand kind of where this goes and what it's about. I think early on, if a new teacher is starting, that they really need to think about, maybe 2 or 3 questions that they want to ask during that lesson that kids can really wrap their mind around. And I think that's important because it carries with it the expectation that kids are going to be doing some thinking, which is ultimately important. But it also establishes a sense for the teacher that they can start with this, they can ask some questions and listen. And as things go on, they'll become more adept at asking questions without necessarily relying so much on the print material. But that is something that we recommend to teachers just getting started is really kind of highlighting or writing out what are the questions that you want the kids to answer. And along with that, hopefully what the answer to those questions are is also important.
For, at least, yeah.
Also important. We want to get out of this expectation that when kids come in on the first day, if they just wait long enough, the teacher will tell them what to think. That's not how we move science forward. We really want to get kids actively involved in thinking. So teachers kind of making sure that they've got the classroom prepared, it's accessible, materials are ready, and that they know where that lesson is going to go.
Lauren, I know you've been a science coordinator at elementary level. What tips do you have for helping teachers get set up? What's important for them to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I was thinking, because I started in high school and then trickled down to middle school, and like what the difference is. There's not a lot of difference in the way that I set up my classroom. For all the different levels, you really just want to make the kids as responsible as possible, because then it takes it off of you. So like when I had at the secondary level, you teach the same class kind of over and over sometimes, like biology, or maybe it might switch a little bit if you teach like chemistry. But what I would do is I would have my first period class set up for my next period class. And so I'd have everything out before school started. I would take a picture of like the science tray with everything on it, and I would put everything in a specific place. Okay, the beaker's in the top right. This is in the top left. This is this, and I take a picture and put it on the board and say, first period, I need your tray to look like this. It should look like this in the beginning. It should look like this after. And when you have like systems like that in place, then when you're walking around getting ready for your next class, you can quickly peek and see, hey, this is missing a beaker. This one's missing this one's that, because it's in the same place on every tray. And so like my kids did this setup. My last period class put everything back. But in order to do that, you have to have a highly organized classroom. Hey, beakers are always here. Everything's labeled in this cabinet. This is where this goes, this. So that anyone who enters the classroom, if I say, hey, I need everything put away, anyone could easily put it away.
And that's definitely something you can get started like day one, right? Getting those practices in order.
And so like what I do day one to like kind of get that in order, like I'll have a bunch of stuff on their desk. Which group can put everything away in the correct order the fastest? Look around the classroom. Where do the beakers go? Where does this go? This go? Like, just making it fun and just teaching them how to set up those routines. So that way, like by the end of the, third week, like cleaning up takes us no longer than 2 minutes. Just so that way it's not overwhelming for the teacher, because it can be if you're unorganized. You're constantly looking for something. Some group doesn't have something. The next class is coming in, something's lost. The list can go on. For my elementary school students, I did a little different, just depending on how much time I had to set up. Like I would have bins, all the beakers in this bin, all this and that. And I would put take 1, take 2 of this item, take 3. And they had roles. The roles switched, but the way they knew their role was there was a little symbol on their desk. Literally took a permanent marker and drew a heart. On my hearts, you're the materials manager. Like, okay, how many beakers are you going to take? I would hold the sign up, take 1. This is like the first week. By third week, I didn't have to do any of that. I say, hearts, get up, get your stuff. Okay, now it's the stars today. Stars, you're putting them back. Put it back. And they know where to put everything because, we practiced those first 2 weeks and just made it fun.
That's great. Yeah, I might have to skirt some child labor laws, but other than that, I think it's awesome. It's really well done. One of the things I love as I'm doing more of these podcasts is I love the collaborative nature of science and how it really goes across all other disciplines, math, English, social studies, art, all of that. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of working together with other teachers at your grade level, and maybe if you're an elementary teacher working, if you're lucky enough to have a science coordinator, all that kind of stuff. So how do you collaborate with, like, say, the English teacher, the art teacher? Because as an artist, I would love to do the apple thing and draw the apple and do that whole kind of thing. So, working with other teachers to get kids excited about science seems to be a natural thing. So, Brian, do you have any suggestions about that? How do you approach other teachers? How do you reach out to your local teacher community to all work together?
I think there's a couple of approaches with it. One, I think administration needs to be involved in part of this as well, whether that's to encourage that or even have common planning time. With some people that you have opportunities to make some connections with. It's unfortunate that there are some situations in which that is difficult to do. My younger brother actually had a teacher in middle school whose role was science and language arts. But unfortunately, it was 45 minutes of science, then it stopped, and then they did language arts with something completely different than what they just did in science. And I think if you look at the field of science and the work that's out there, they have to be able to communicate what it is that they're working on, whether it be to peers or whether it be to the world at large. In order to do that, they have to use language arts skills. They have to use mathematics skills. And from a language arts perspective, you have to read, write, and speak and listen about something, about some content. Fortunately, or unfortunately, a lot of that is fiction, and a smaller part of that is nonfiction. So when you have some ideas from administration that there needs to be a stronger tie between the nonfiction and the world of science and social studies, that's where you start to get some of those opportunities. So writing becomes more purposeful. And I think getting together with English language arts teachers, and this is probably more in middle school, is that there has to be some sort of a product that can come out of it. So, for example, if you've done a 2-week-long investigation on some organisms, is that there can be a report of findings out. And that report of findings can go through the writing process. It can have voice. It can have grammar. It can have good adjective use. It can have transition words. All of those things that are part of language arts can be part of how science is communicated. And I think if there is a product that is agreed upon by both science and language arts, that those can actually work really well together. I think there is some difficulty in kind of letting it be loose because I think they'll start competing for things. Well, can you do more of this in your science time? Can you do more of this in your language arts time? Whereas ideally it should be about the whole child. Can we both work together to help this child or this group of children produce something that's worthwhile? And I think that conversation, if admin supports it and encourages it, they'll devote some time for it. I think it's challenging in the elementary school if they're departmentalized and it's not encouraged, is where it becomes, I think, a little more grassroots has to happen. But I would definitely see if admin can get some buy-in, but actually putting it towards a product that can be displayed in the walls. Can go home to parents. It can go home to families.
Back to school nights, that kind of thing.
Back to school nights.
Because my kids went to one school that it was great. I thought that was all put together, the art department, and they put things that work together, and it was very, very cool. Lauren, how about you? Any way to weigh in about how you get teachers to collaborate and why it's important?
I think collaboration looks a little differently, secondary versus primary. Secondary is a little bit easier because you can kind of see, when you're teaching science, you see where the gaps are at the school level. So like graphing, for one, like for some reason it's graphing is kind of one of those things that kind of gets snubbed a little bit, but it shows up a lot in science. And so it's very easy to go to your, 7th grade math teacher and say, hey, I'm noticing their students aren't doing a lot of graphing or need a little bit of extra work. When you guys get to this unit, can you spend more time on it? Or even going to the 6th grade teacher, and saying, hey, this standard is showing up a lot, when I'm teaching science, can you spend some time on this? Or give them a little extra homework or, whatever that is. With primary, because there's so many different things you have to teach in different curriculums, you definitely need the support of the admin, just because science already is one of those things that kind of is on the back end with all of the other curriculums, because there's testing associated with it. It kind of takes the priority. But I think if your admin gives you a little bit of time in PD, like even 3 minutes to say, hey, this is what I've noticed. Here's the data from my students. Is anyone else seeing this? What do you guys want to do about this? And kind of collaborating with the other teachers and saying like, okay, let's all give this little, I don't know, I'll call it a do now as a school site. And let's see if in 6 weeks, if we can see if our percentage as a school site will, go up. Things like that work well with primary. But yeah, secondary is kind of easier to just go directly to the teachers and say, hey, when are you guys doing this? Can you focus on this? This is what I'm seeing. And they're able to kind of squeeze it in a little bit easier.
This is definitely one of those things that as we get this podcast off the ground, I would love to urge any listeners to send in ideas about this kind of thing, because I'm sure it probably varies from district to district, state to state. So everybody's got their own sort of, problems and things they solved with those problems. So if you are listening, send us some information. I also want to ask you guys about, teachers may face certain barriers to science teaching, or things that might be intimidating to them, or things like that. So Laruen, with your expertise, I wanted to weigh in on that. What sort of barriers do teachers face, and if they're intimidated by it, how do they overcome these things?
Yeah, there's quite a few barriers that I see like a lot of teachers face. One is planning. Sometimes their do now or whatever they start the classroom takes way too long. They've lost the interest of the students. Too much teacher talk, and then so the students start messing with things. Sometimes the norms aren't revisited enough. And so students are touching things before you say. Just kind of like a lot of cultural things for the classroom. Easy fixes, though. Another thing I would say is like movement of the classroom. A lot of teachers feel like science feels a lot more unstructured. And so students are kind of talking more, and just the way trainings and things like, or the way we went through school, a great classroom looks like a quiet classroom, a classroom where everyone just has a pencil. And so science is the total opposite of that, right? Because you want the students to talk. You want the students to be able to get up and do this. Sometimes the students get excited. You hear like a whoa, or like, and so when the norms aren't really consistent, then what you'll see is the teacher kind of start to freak out. Anxiety levels go through the roof. And then that's when they start yelling or start being kind of more so punitive, or like just put everything back, put your heads down, kind of negative. So what I would say, my advice would just be like, you set your norms with your students in the beginning, always refer back to them. And before you start the experiment, where do you want them at? Hey, I do want you guys to talk. Science is collaborative, but you should be at a level 2. Hey, we're keeping a clean classroom. That's one of our norms. So please take care of the materials. Your tray should look like this at the end, or your desk should look like this. Just being clear about what the expectations are, and even let the kids tell you what the norms are, what they're expecting to see. Get them involved in the process. Let them do the talking, and you kind of sit back and just monitor.
Brian, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think Laruen hit on a couple of things on the classroom side. I think from a building standpoint, there are simple things like making sure that teachers have access to the materials. Do they know where they are? Especially if there's a lot of turnover in the school, sometimes they get put into a closet down the hall or whatever it is. So finding that material is important. The other thing that comes up frequently is the idea of training. So when we have new school years, we sometimes have people that shift grade levels or even are new to the building. It's important that they receive training. And sometimes that's capable in the district. Sometimes it's done in-house. But one of the other things that can be done, and this can be done throughout the year, is being able to see a master teacher at work. So whether that be something that the administration can help you, find 15, 20 minutes to go over and watch another teacher teach, is fantastic, because it sets the expectation of like, this is how it could look. There's other things. I know that on our FOSS web, we actually have videos of Laruen actually teaching in a number of settings as well. So just getting a sense of what a science classroom looks like, feels like, sounds like, can also be helpful. The other things that are kind of small and to the point, modeling norms. This is what this looks like, having students modeling how to talk to each other in a dyad or in a triad in a group. This is what it looks like to be in a group. Modeling those things, I think, as Lauren said, kind of helps establish that routine. But even if there are some barriers that are in the way, oftentimes those barriers are not insurmountable. They might take a little bit of time and perseverance to stay with it, but the idea that on the other side of those barriers is some fantastic learning for kids with some great excitement, and it makes their day, if not their year. So,
you know what they really need? They need a podcast where people talk about these things. Oh, wait.
Yes.
Here we have one. It's awesome. So to wrap up, generally speaking, we all, of course, are on board with the fact that science is incredibly important, and getting things started off on the right foot at the beginning of the year is incredibly important. So, Brian, I just want you to sort of like, in summary, feeling like any just encouragement or tips you have for teachers as they start the new year here at the end of 2023 to get science off the ground.
I think to start with something that's engaging and something that's doable, both for you and the students, is important. We want it to be something that you feel good about, but also that students feel energized when they're done with it. And I think just overall, not to make it about me, but one of the things that I enjoy about science is asking students what they're thinking, because that to me is the unknown. The unknown is not the science. The science, most of the stuff in elementary, we know what's happening. But the curious question is what the students think are happening. And I think that that's something that is very engaging and sometimes comical. So I encourage that teachers take the time to listen to what students are thinking about, because it shows a lot of what's going on inside their head, which is why we're all here.
Lauren, how about you? A nice summary for why you think it's important to get off the ground, hit the ground running in the right back to school.
It really sets up your year. If you don't practice these routines, and build that culture with your students, it's going to be a long year. just to be, nice about it. But it's the perfect time. Everyone's excited about everything. They're excited to be in your class. They're excited to meet you. They're excited to meet their peers. They're excited to work with each other. And so if you start off the year with science as this great thing, where it's like, this is the time you get to talk, because a lot of times students aren't encouraged to talk. It's like, sit here, be quiet. No, this is the time you get to actually build with your hands. This is the time where you get to do this. This is the time. There's something for everyone. And it's not kind of just that space where you're like, okay, here we go. You're dragging along.
Just learning facts and figures. That's it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Just regurgitating facts. And also just remember, students build off of your energy. So if it's science is one of those things where you're dreading it, the students feel that, and they're gonna come into class and be like, okay, here we go. Teacher's stressed. She's gonna be getting on my case about every little thing. Here's the negativity. She's not saying anything positive. They're gonna really resent that time. So if you start off strong, you're having fun with it. It's less prep for you because use the students. They want to help. They love helping. It's fun for everyone.
Well, that's awesome. Laruen Brown, Brian Campbell, thank you both for your insight into this, and we hope that teachers everywhere get off to a good start in 2023 and 2024.
Hi there, this is producer David Lippman. We heard a lot of great tips on getting started in the science classroom in this coming school year in this episode, and we'd really like to hear from you. Please send us things that you do in your classroom, tips you have for other teachers, or anything else you'd like to share with us at itstimeforscience@schoolspecialty.com. Thank you so much for listening.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lippman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the full option science system, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS over on Facebook and Twitter.